Cool, yeah. So I'm Chris, also known around the show as Phage. So my day job sees me serving as a security architect for a consultancy, and my evenings spent co-organising the Christchurch iSig and Christchurch Hacker Conference, and hunting badness with Threat Safari, which is what this talk is based around. So let's begin by introducing the group. So Threat Safari began as the Showdown Safari channel on InfoSec New Zealand Slack, where we shared interesting finds of Showdown, but it didn't actually really do anything to help them. So one day, SparkleOps messaged me and was like, I've just smashed 3 platters of chicken wings and a bottle of Bordeaux and I'm pretty keen to go out and fight some internet scum. You keen? And yeah, hell yeah, I was. So as it turns out, both of us believe that not enough has been done to help victims of compromise, and our victims deserve better than discussion of their compromise plastered on public forums. So one thing led to another. 6 like-minded volunteers banded together and formed Threat Safari elsewhere. We had one pretty serious problem though, and that's that we didn't really have any idea what we were doing. All of us worked in decent-sized organisations, so we're able to milk our seams and email filters for signs of New Zealand's badness. Kind of fumbled around for a few months, burning up a lot of time doing this, and only making a handful of disclosures. So we needed to do something to automate this. As it turns out, I already had the perfect basis for this automation, and that would become known as the Safari Guide platform. So this platform reports on New Zealand-specific blacklisted hosts, command and control servers, malware hosts, phishing sites, compromised devices and sites. This data is gathered using plugins that cover around 60 feeds, Intel community sandboxes, honeypots and spam traps, Showdown and Google Dorking, paste sites, and a few details I can't really discuss in public. The basic process of analysing a single entity could begin with a URL from some variety of source, resolving its IP, or a file hash, dumping out known communicating samples from VirusTotal or ThreatMiner, then using those sources to find other malicious IPs in that network and in turn more URLs for those IPs. URLs are requested, binary data considered malware, and everything else phishing. So all binaries are classified using VirusTotal, and the command and control servers for them, if applicable, are discovered using open source Intel or a sandbox in the case that the sample is unknown and the IPs for them are reprocessed, and any New Zealand IPs or domains considered relevant. Phishing is deemed relevant if the site is hosted in New Zealand or has a New Zealand domain and is identified as having indicators of a phishing kit, or if the phishing kit contains New Zealand brand data. The culmination of this is a daily report that outlines all the threats found in the past 24 hours, with the likes of what you can see here, some details aid triage like ASN counts and screenshots of phishing sites. Anything significant is reported to CERT or organisational contacts that we have, and everything else submitted to Google Safe Browsing and antivirus vendors. Before you ask, and it's terrible, Safari Guide is closed source and will remain this way for the foreseeable future, as I can't make public some of the discovery techniques I use, or they'll lose their effectiveness. But a bulk of the feed and enrichment facilities are available in my open source project for Nutria, which leads into the second part of the story, which is the origin of Safari Guide. So a few years back, I developed a bit of a problem, and that was hoarding malware. So I come back from a background of cracking and keygenning, wanted a more legitimate application for some of these skills, and malware analysis looked to be the perfect fit. The problem was I had no malware. So I set myself 2 tasks, find where malware comes from and download all of it. This would seem simple enough, but as it turns out, malware is one of those awful things that's easy to find when you're not looking for it, and elusive when you're set out trying to find it. So I looked at a few projects that harvested malware in bulk, and was either dissatisfied with them or just plain couldn't afford them. So like the good Kiwi I am, I built my own. And the result was for Nutria, which is open sourced and you're more than welcome to play with. So what it does is it ingests URL feeds and downloads the malware via Tor. Pretty easy. But to produce a richer data set, it extends it using VirusTotal in much the same manner that Safari Guide does. So all malware is stored in Viper because, well, that's what Viper is for. It does a really good job of storing malware, organising it, and facilitating handing it off to external services like Cuckoo Sandbox and antivirus engines. But there is, of course, more. So being the greedy person I am, I wasn't content with a somewhat second-hand collection of malware. I wanted to be on the receiving end of samples straight from the source, which led to a thought. Criminals want victims, so let's make them some victims. First method I dabbled with was honeypots, and Dynia became and still is my honeypot of choice. It's a multi-protocol honeypot that is able to emulate the likes of FTP, HTTP, SMB, and industrial control system services, downloads all the malware that's sent to it. So I've developed a script for automatically deploying both Kauri, SSH, honeypot, and Dynia, along with a web front end that you can use for reporting and downloading all the captured samples. So if you want to have a go for yourself, you'll find it on my malware hunting repo, also up on GitHub. However, this does leave you with a single view for each honeypot. So if you plan to scale out your deployment, I'd recommend looking at something like Modern Honey Network, which feeds all of your honeypot data into a central location and makes deployment dead easy and highly configurable. Downside is you do lose some of the depth of information that the honeypots produce themselves, but you can still deploy elk on your management server at install time or afterwards and derive heaps of value out of the data that's pulled in. And you also get a pretty sweet pew-pew graph because everyone loves those. If deployed in the right location, honeypots can net some really interesting results. Just be mindful though that aimlessly deploying honeypots directly on the web and common hosting providers more or less gets the same internet background noise. So don't expect to find anything of interest or groundbreaking on the likes of AWS unless you've otherwise tied it to an actual high value target like through an organization's DNS. The second method, which requires a lot more work but nets some pretty superb results, is reviving a dead company. For this, you'll need a domain with a good amount of history behind it. I prefer at least 10 years and a good amount of presence in Google search results. And expireddomains.net is really good for searching and filtering on these attributes. You can then use Cloudflare to mask your infrastructure, and who has privacy is just a given nowadays, really. The infrastructure could be as simple as a small EC2 instance running mail in a box, which will set you up with a web server for your corporate website and a mail server that you can strip all the mail filters off of and set up a catch-all inbox to catch anything sent to it. If you want to take things one step further, you could build out some fake social media profiles, replace the public website with WordPot, which is a WordPress honeypot available in Modern Honey Network, not that any WordPress instance isn't already a honeypot. This just uses Django HTML templates. And then you could set up some more honeypots under other common subdomains. You can then deploy your addresses out into the world, into websites and pastes, message boards, mailing lists, mail clients on your sandboxes, or the forms of phishing pages. And over time, you'll begin getting bucket loads of interesting and, in turn, interesting malware. Of course, the name of the game is automation, so what I've done is set up the Hive to receive mail and make a new case for each message. Hive has a very usable interface, so it makes triage really, really easy. Anything of interest you can pump into its analyzer component Cortex, and no, not that Cortex, although they'll probably get it too, which is able to integrate it with sandboxes like Cuckoo and Hybrid Analysis and provide context on observables using the threat intel feeds of MISP. Hive reports are really tidy and easy to digest, so they're a refreshing change from the daunting interfaces and some of the bigger tools like MISP. Really good for juniors and non-basic folks to use. And who knows, you may actually find some problems in your own backyard, like this Emotet sample. They had a New Zealand command and control server that, thanks to CERT, was taken down in all of 30 minutes. Now, I've spoken briefly of this subject in the past, but have neglected one pretty important matter, and that's that, unsurprisingly, criminals are pretty terrible people. As such, luring them into positions where you intend for them to slip up and get caught is pretty risky business, and this is not a risk that you just put on your register and forget about. It actually does need handling. So you absolutely must construct robust and well compartmentalized aliases to work under. Whatever you do, don't cross-contaminate them. There's no room for it. At a minimum, I'd expect each alias to have a unique name, appearance, and background, a dedicated hardware network connection, which could be as simple as a laptop and VPN, or at least a Unix workstation for operation. Of course, a dedicated email per alias and disposable addresses where possible. Goes without saying not to link your real credit card to your work, so make use of disposable visas like Prezi cards. And if you require a phone, use a dumb burner because, yeah. And also, addresses, don't use them because nothing really requires them. As a rule, I operate by, if you cannot comfortably burn an entire alias and all associated accounts and devices, it's not suitable for use. Also be careful with where and what you share. You don't want to accidentally burn aliases. As an example, as seen on the left here, some email campaigns may use unique IDs to track you, or on the right, they may just include your email in the URL itself. So be mindful of this and obfuscate any potential tracking items. Similarly, be careful with what tradecraft you speak of. Classic example here, malware U researchers were using a SQL injection vulnerability in this variety of command and control panel to obtain addresses of compromised victims so they could help them. This champion replied to the thread, mentioned this, and shortly thereafter the devs patched it and researchers lost access. Also bear in mind, services you use to analyze samples will generally share this data with researchers or anyone with enough money. If you load a company confidential document by accident, congratulations, you're now the reason for a breach of your company. So it's important to triage everything locally and scan observables first. So that's file hashes, IPs, and domains. Of course, these precautions extend well beyond hunting malware and should just be really standard practice for anything you do online. So the value of this talk will be pretty limited without discussing some of the learnings I've derived, so let's go over those. First off, don't go full potato with aimlessly writing your own tools. Learn how actors operate, what noises they make, and how you can hear them. If you find a fragment of data, go hunting for other places you can find it and see what else they offer. What has really helped shape my methods has been to ask myself what really makes a site malicious. Traditionally, people have relied on observables like domains, but a bulk of malicious artifacts I find are under compromised websites where the domain is unrelated. More successful has been asking what actually makes a site malicious. So most phishing pages ask for usernames, passwords, credit card details, emails, all that stuff. And they'll contain visual identifiers like a brand, but won't be hosted under the expected domain for that brand. Right from the inception of Finutria, I've had this dislike of repeating what others are already doing, so I've strived to generate a more unique data set, even if built mostly using open source intel. So when you discover a source, look at what inputs and outputs it has, how you can leverage existing data to create more output, or what other sources you can feed those outputs into. As an example, you could take just one URL or dig a little deeper and find a whole lot more. This was done using VirusTotal Graph, which probably appears like the blue team equivalent of stunt hacking, but it actually can be really useful, so go have a play with it yourself. Related to this, problems often resurface, so make sure you store your data and regularly reprocess your network observables to see what else pops up. Experiences. I cannot reiterate how lucky we are to have the great people we do in CERT, Department of Internal Affairs, and the police e-crime team, and I'm certain I'm not alone in feeling this. So please give them all the support and backing that you can muster. We also have some really, really good people working in the SOCs of our banks and telcos who are dealing with mammoth amounts of phishing and really making a dent in some of the operations behind it. I don't really want to say negative findings, so I'll say other. Unfortunately, small and medium-sized businesses are mostly flying blind, as are plenty of big ones for that matter. They're given poor advice by the IT suppliers and little to no support. Partly to blame is the shortage of real blue team talent in New Zealand, so incident response more often than not doesn't address the root cause and winds up with lingering compromises, sites being burnt to the ground or entire clusters of sites under an IP being blacklisted. Right, enough doom and gloom. How can you make a difference? Besides thinking about some of the tools and techniques I've spoken of, a lot of this comes down to education. If the general public were more clued up on internet safety in much the same way most people develop street smarts, some of these suppliers will get questioned and would up their game, and everyone wins. So I encourage you to work through the CERT Top 10 Critical Controls with your friends, family and co-workers, and use the Citizen Labs Security Planner to help with the doing side of this. If you see any issues, report them to CERT. If you deal with the issue directly, still tell them, because awareness really helps them with their mission. If you want to go one step further, Swift on Security of Twitter fame has produced this excellent site, gotfish.com. Steps through both triage and reporting of phishing and malware, and helps you make informed decisions and get problems clobbered as quickly as possible. Cool, so that's that. If there's anything else you'd like clarified, or you're doing similar work, I'd love to chat to you. Otherwise, have a read of the accompanying blog post on my site. Also, if you're interested in an InfoSec job in Christchurch, come talk to me, because I may have something for you. Cheers.